Good evening. This is Quintus Curtius, and welcome back to the podcast. And in this podcast, we've done an interview with the proprietor of the website banterloud.com. Banterloud, and this gentleman is Lucas Temple, very interesting guy. And I've spoken to Lucas before, and I was impressed with a lot of the things that I heard from him. He's a guy who's just recently got married. He's going to be having his first child soon. And he's got a lot of traditional ideas about marriage, relationships, and large families, and kind of an interesting counterpoint to what you normally see out in the popular culture about, never get married and never have kids and all the rest of it. So Lucas is kind of a traditional guy, and for a guy in his 20s, I was always impressed. He seems like he's got his, himself really squared away and his ideas and his mind right. So I wanted to talk to him. And hopefully you'll get a lot out of this interview as well. So if you just bear with me for a second here, I'm going to see if I can raise him on the phone, and then we'll go right to the interview. And we are back here, and this is Quintus Curtius here. Welcome back to the podcast. And I have with me right now Lucas Temple. Lucas Temple, who is the proprietor of the website banterloud.com. Lucas, are you there?
I'm here.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, listen, I really appreciate your coming on the podcast here, because just from reading some of your posts, I think that your background and your goals are very different from what a lot of readers and listeners normally see. I mean, from what I understand, you're married now and you've got some plans on how you want to structure your family environment. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, what's going on in your life right now?
So, right now, I'm married. I just got married about 2 months ago. We now have a kid on the way.
All right. Congratulations.
So we're we're getting started fast. My wife wants a lot of kids. I want a lot of kids. We've made family our number one priority. And
well, let me ask you this: how did you? One of the things that I've often asked, guys, like how did you decide that you wanted to have kids? Was that something you always wanted, or did it gradually come to you after you got married, or like right before you got married? How did that decision process carry through for you?
It started a long time ago, actually. I was homeschooled for a few years. I always went to private schools, and a lot of the homeschooling families I noticed, they had big families, 8, 9 kids. I was shocked. Yeah. And some of it comes from the idea of what was called the quiverful movement, where you have essentially as many kids as possible. And what I noticed was if you wanted to build a legacy, you need children.
Yeah.
And I noticed who's having kids and who's not. And if you want to defeat the ideas of the SJWs, you have to outbreed them. And luckily for us, they're always, praising abortion, wanting as many as possible. And I'm like, by all means, please abort your kids. It'll be that much easier to outbreed you.
Right,
the exception, though, is that we can't send our kids to the public schools. We have to homeschool them. We have to either, come together and basically educate our kids, or else if you bring up your kids in the public schools, they'll become indoctrinated with that worldview. And it's all about worldview from a young age.
Well, just the standards are just not anywhere. I mean, I went to a small town public school in New England. I mean, my graduating class in high school was less than 100. But I mean, those days are over. I mean, I just think the safety is not there anymore. The quality of the education is not there. I mean, if I had kids, I wouldn't want them anywhere near a place like where I went. I mean, they're just dead end places. There's just nothing. You're going to get, like you said, you're going to get indoctrinated. You're going to get, your ears stuffed full of nonsense. So I think that's good that you're doing that. So how did you how does homeschooling, how does that work? I mean, is there books that you buy and then curriculum you got to go through? Is it just on your own? I mean, how does that, how do you structure that?
There's plenty of options. There's some big homeschooling conferences that take place. Like Illinois has one that's usually held in DeKalb at the, I think it's NIU up down there from where I live.
Right.
But there's groups. Like I went to some groups where, there were certain subjects where, people would help tutor. But I had curriculum. set aside. And actually my more serious homeschooling started when my dad got more involved. And this was later in high school. My last 3 years of high school, I homeschooled. and he would have me get up at 7:30, and I went to 5:30, and it was
Wow.
structured. I took a typing class in the morning, then I took a rhetoric class, then I took a
Oh, I
worldview
love it.
one. I would take an hour and a half of Latin because my
All
dad wanted me to
right.
get a start in the Romance languages. That's something about you that I had noticed. I'm like, he self-taught himself Latin. I was blown
Yeah.
away. But it all starts with the
Yeah.
classics. Um, One
Well,
of
that's
the
great
guys
to
he
hear you
really
say
liked.
that, man. I really love to. I knew there was something about you, man, that I knew there was something. I couldn't put my finger on it. That's great. That's great.
But and it's called the trivium approach. But one of the things I did is I went through a series of what was called modernity lectures. This is a guy he's a Presbyterian, but he kind of opened my eyes, as I was listening to these lectures, and I loved them. They were interesting. This
Right.
guy's got like two PhDs. I think his name is Dr. George Grant, and it kind of he kept commenting a lot about how a lot of these brilliant people in history got their starts by reading the classics.
Yeah.
And these guys, kids, they'd be 12 years old, they could speak multiple languages. I'm like, how is this happening? How are they able to do this? Like, I think it was it John Adams or John Quincy Adams? One
Yeah.
of them could write, uh, what was it, with both hands at the same time on two different subjects.
Oh
And
my
like,
God.
I'm like, what? In two different languages or something. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, how do we bring up kids like that? And I believe it has to start at an early age. Like,
Yeah.
my plan is I'm having a son, so I'm like, cool, I can start that off right away. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm like, okay, music, you want to, music is very good for brain development. Language as well. Kids can learn a lot of language quickly, so you want to invest in that. You want a good starting structure for, let's say, English, even with mathematics. I mean, I went
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
when I was out of kindergarten, I went to a Christian Liberty Academy when I was really young, and I could read the newspaper by the time I was out of kindergarten. That's how rigorous it was,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I need to be able to do the same thing.
Well, that's what I think that was like the idea behind a classical education. You had the muses, I forget, I think, you had mathematics, music, rhetoric, um, probably, maybe history or languages. I mean, there was it's like six or seven muses, and I know like math and music and rhetoric were in there, and the others they escape me, but I just think that's great that you're doing that because I guess it's like the typical, just the opposite of what sort of the young people today are out there spouting. Like be single forever and go out there and just do pointless, frivolous nonsense for the rest of your life. And I guess you're taking um, a whole different approach. And I think maybe that's going to be the model for the future. Maybe we're going to go back to the traditional model.
And we need support systems to do that. Like, my parents are willing to help out quite a bit to help educate my kids. And
Yeah,
my dad brought me up with this vision. And it's called, we have to have a multi-generational outlook. We might not be able to beat the SJWs in this generation, but if we keep laying a foundation where our kids have have a similar worldview, and they have kids and they do the same thing and they educate them,
yeah,
that is where you have to start. It's cultural and it's over the generations. And I mean, I had okay, so I didn't lose my virginity until I was 25. I
wow,
mean, I had a couple opportunities before, but I was too scared. Like, it took me a while to realize, hey, I'm a good-looking guy. I can do this. And I kind of discovered. I think it was Return of Kings, was one of the sites I discovered, and I loved it because it was provocative and controversial. And I've always loved that shit. Like,
yeah, yeah,
I always did hate sites where they had these crazy comment moderation, nothing that's offensive, racist, blah blah blah. I'm like, well, anything can be offensive. Who the hell determines this crap?
right, right,
And I loved that. And I learned a little bit of game, and within like 2 years, actually, correction, about a year and a half, I went from a count of 0 to like 10 girls,
that's
and
awesome, man.
I
That's
was
great.
going nuts. But within about a little over a year, I was like, I'm bored of this. What took Roosh, as long as it took him to kind of discover as to, whoa, you kind of burn up on the hedonistic treadmill, so to speak. You're
Right.
like, there's got to be more. That only took me about maybe a year and a half. And it was with that mindset that I went in with my wife, and I was like, okay, I need to find a very certain kind of girl. I'm looking for wife material, not, fuck buddy per se.
Yeah, yeah.
You
And how
know,
did you find? Was this somebody that like how did you meet your wife? Like, what's the
so
story behind that?
we both went to the same school. We went to a
Oh,
Christian
that's good.
university. I worked there. It was a good job for me. And I met her, and we originally started off as more like a friends with benefit situation, and my wife hadn't really slept with anyone,
Yeah, that's great.
I worked my magic. I was like, boom, and as I got to know her and talk with her, there was a lot of our things that started to align. And right when we started dating, I told her kind of my intentions. I'm like, you're marriage material. We
Wow, that's
talked
great.
about, ideas of, kids. Would we homeschool our kids? What kind of family I wanted, and she kind of knew a lot of my views. I didn't hide these from her. Like, I just read her the other day, what was it, Rush's article, and she understood his point perfectly, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, was your family? Did you come from an immigrant background, or were you like,
My grandparents did.
That's great. Well, the only
My
reason I ask is because I know,
Yeah.
like on Twitter, like you've got, I guess your Twitter handle is Armenia Forever, and I thought maybe you might be from, have
I'm
relatives.
I'm half and half. So I'm half Armenian and I'm half a combination of different European background.
Oh, great.
And I became very proud of both, actually. Probably my Armenian more. And then I'm like, wow, I could trace my family history on my dad's side. My dad is white. My mom is Middle Eastern Armenian. So basically what Rush is, Iranian
Yeah,
Armenian.
yeah.
And I became very proud of it. The survivor attitude. Plus, it always allows me to play identity politics. I could
Well,
play the
you've got to
genocide card.
be, yeah. Well, you've got to be. People should be proud of who they are and where they come from. I think that's a great thing. And I'm looking at. I've looked at your site here, and I noticed like a lot of your articles, you kind of emphasize that. I get that sense it's kind of like an independence mindset and a you know maybe do it yourself is the kind of the wrong word for it, but you know what I mean. You're kind of like a free spirit type of mindset. Is that? I mean, what would you say are the main themes of your blog, if you can think of any?
Is to live life. It's kind of an adventure, per se, and you know that can be in fatherhood, that can be exploring the world, and I mean, all the one of the things I grew up reading is all these great stories. I wasn't allowed to really watch TV until I was in like fifth grade.
Wow.
So my primary form of entertainment was reading books. I read different works of fiction. I loved military history, the whole like time life question of that, and I loved,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
kind of built within me, a sense of
Yeah.
I could see basically people live their life, and what do I want to do with my life. And I went through a kind of period where everything's vanity. I'm like, man, why bother? We're just gonna die, And I've always been very philosophical on it, but I couldn't read the surface. Right on the surface. Not as I'll say analytical like book. I used to know how to do that. Like when it came to syllogisms, I was like, you're losing me now, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we all have our moments, but no, that's great, Lucas. And I knew there was something about you that I was connecting with. Like you can just maybe just and just from hearing you talk, I think I would have liked a lot of the same books that you did, growing up. And that's kind of really what inspired me when I started writing. I felt like, I want to write the type of book that I wish I had when I was, you know, reading about, these things in the beginning. You know what I mean? So I kind of said to myself, I wish, I wish there had been when I first started getting into a lot of this stuff, years ago, when I was in my 20s or earlier, like I want to put something together that I wish that I had had, and I guess that was just kind of the motivating factor. I think a lot of guys are like that.
oh, absolutely. And the amount of literature out there that's good is is declining. And one of the
Yeah.
issues is just attention spans. Like I look at, for instance, your work, and I'm like, wow, there's some great quality here. And one thing that Cernovich always said is quality matters, and it does. But clickbait usually gets more attention, and I'm like, why don't people look at this? And it's because it takes time. It's not mindless entertainment. Like
Yeah.
for instance, when you surf Facebook, it doesn't take any real brain power. It's just easy, kind of on your on your mind. But when you really read into a
Yeah.
book, and I've done this before where I'm reading and I'm like, what did I just read? I have to read it like three times. I have to reread it to understand what it was. And I noticed what the older the book is, you know.
Yeah, you've got to follow the train. It's funny. No, it's and that's the real frustration or the big, I guess, conundrum of the modern, situation is, what that trade-off between quality and accessibility. I mean, if you're I did a post on that today on my own site, just basically talking about the perishability of knowledge. It's like the knowledge and the stuff coming out now, it's all digital. It's gone literally it's gone almost instantly. And yet books in the old days, they were either paper, or you go back farther, just parchment or vellum. And that stuff lasted for thousands of years. I mean, is our stuff going to be around? I mean, we can't even read emails from 20 years ago, man. We can't even read emails from 20
Wow.
years ago. Never mind stuff. I'm seriously, it's all digital. It's all perishable. It's like you almost wonder if we are in a dark age right now, and yet we don't know it. We just don't know
We're
it.
almost stuck in where there's so much information we can't find what's important. We're so swamped. It's like
Right.
we're drowning in water, searching for, the good water, the filtered water, and we don't know where it is because we're in the sea. There's water all around us, so we can't get what we want. And that's, I think, the next frontier. Like, my interest has always heavily been journalism, and I did actually quite a bit of. I took a lot of classes. I'm actually, maybe 20 credits away from finishing my degree up. I'm like, man, I should take some night
Great.
classes. But I'm like, what am I going to do with it? And I look at journalism now, and I'm like, do I really want to sell my soul? And it always interested me.
Yeah.
Like, my professor was this old school English teacher. I love her. One of these women, like, she came from South Africa. So she doesn't have the accent anymore, but she
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
rigorous. You couldn't use words like "do," "stated," no semicolons, like all these crazy rules. Barrier sentence
Right.
structure.
Right.
I'm like, what? And the kids in the class are like, this is impossible. I'm like, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I'm thankful now because it made me a better writer. And I remember writing some papers for her, and she loved them because I would go in depth. I actually cared about the subject. But it kind of revealed to me over time just how bad the state of journalism is now. I don't think we'll ever recover.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
back to yellow
Yeah.
journalism of the 1900s. That's essentially what it is. And
Oh yeah, it's all about emotional arousal.
mhm.
That's all it is. It's all about. I mean, I think the only way to be maybe a good journalist is be kind of like what these freelancers like you read about, like the guys who go to dangerous parts of the world to report on conflict zones, and the near or the guys who go undercover in some group somewhere to learn about the I don't know, you name it. He goes. I think you've got the adventure journalism is probably the sole places where I think you can have some integrity. But yeah, if you want to work for these major news outlets, you've got to churn and burn. I mean, you've just got to just churn out the
And
bullshit.
that's one of the issues is I look at, for instance, like the manosphere, the alt-right. What do we not really have? We don't, and it's not just us. It's a lot of places. There's very few actual journalists. Look at all the pieces that come out. They do essentially what bloggers
Yeah.
do. You look at links, you watch videos. That's not actual journalism. There's no actual interviews. You didn't go to somebody. You didn't interview them. You didn't do like research by talking to neighbors. There
No.
is none of that anymore. There's not actually real journalism. And that's kind of what I like what
Somebody,
Forney did, at least, in Iowa, where he's going there.
Yeah, he's about the closest thing, and he does actually. I think he studied journalism, if I remember right. I don't know exactly what his background is, but I think he was or is a bona fide journalist. But I think his model is probably the only way you can do it and keep your integrity. I think because he works for himself,
Yep.
doesn't have to answer to anybody. But no, I agree, man. I tell you what, we could talk for hours, I think,
We
and
could.
but I really appreciate your coming on and talking with us and giving the listeners a chance to learn a little bit about your philosophy. And you're going to have to come back soon and let us know how things are going, and how being a dad, how all that develops. I think it'll be a learning experience for all of
Oh,
us.
absolutely.
But anyway, Lucas, listen, have a good weekend here. Keep the fires burning, and we will talk to you soon.
All righty.
All right,
You
take
too.
care.
And that will conclude our interview with Lucas Temple of the website banterloud.com. We hope you enjoyed it. I know that I did. And until next time, we hope you stay safe and sound here this weekend. And if you enjoyed this podcast, I would ask that you go to iTunes and rate me on iTunes to help others find this podcast. And this was brought to you courtesy of Fortress of the Mind Publications. And until next time, I'm Quintus Curtius. Good night.